Shalom Chaverim. This political update is going to deal with Turkey, with the financial crisis in Turkey, with the corruption of the Islamic leadership of Erdogan and his ministers. At this point, Erdogan is still the president or prime minister of Turkey. What will be coming soon is going to be very interesting. What I want to do first is to go back a moment to the expulsion of the Jews and the Muslims from Spain in 1492. And for those of you who are Jewish, like me, you know that we equate King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain in 1492 to Adolf Hitler. We equate the Inquisition and the expulsion from Spain. And my wife, Rachel, comes from a family of Jews who were expelled from Spain in 1492. We equate that expulsion and that Inquisition and that persecution to the Holocaust of Nazi Germany. It was a horrible, horrible trauma for the Jewish people at that time. That's 1492. And what I wanted to start with is a brief history, very brief, of the Islamic invasions of Spain. The first invasion was in 711. And here you see Arabs coming from Arabia across North Africa and then crossing over near the Straits of Gibraltar and conquering Spain, 711. And they made it all the way up almost to Belgium. 732 was the Battle of Charleroi, the famous Battle of Roland and Charles Martel defeating the Arabs, and then over a period of 760 years, pushing the Muslims south again. Now, of course, they didn't push all the way down, they pushed about to the middle of Spain, and the Moroccan Muslims launched two more invasions of Spain in the 11th century and the 12th century. All this, of course, is during the time of the Crusades. The Jews, for better or for worse, had no choice but to be allied with the Muslims. So there were three invasions of Spain by the Muslims. By 1391, Spain forced the Jews in Spain either to leave or convert. 1492 actually was not the forcing of the conversion of the Jews to Christianity. 1492 was the conquest of Granada in the south. And of course, the Jews and the Muslims who lived in the south either had to convert to Christianity or leave the Iberian Peninsula. So this is a horrible thing. But now looking back in retrospect, what I see is something very interesting. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, they were educated to be king and queen. They knew the geography. They knew the 760 years of war with Islam. The war with Islam did not start on 9/11. The war with Islam was going on from 7/11 in Spain until the year 1492. Why did Ferdinand and Isabella call for the expulsion of the Jews and the Muslims? And the answer is something most people, most historians, completely overlook. In 1492, the Turkish Empire, controlled all the way to Morocco. All of North Africa was under the control of the Turks. The Spanish king and queen knew and saw that the Turkish fleet was right off the coast of Spain, waiting to invade Spain. In other words, in order to ensure that there was no back door left open for a fourth Islamic invasion of Spain, the Spanish Catholic king and queen called for the expulsion of the Jews and the Muslims. As painful as this is for us, for me as a Jew, but from the perspective of realpolitik, they had no choice in order to ensure the Christianity of their country. Otherwise, the Turks would come and invade. We can't forget, in 1492, the Turks had already worked their way up to Vienna. This whole area, south of where my finger is, Hungary, Romania, Serbia, Croatia, Yugoslavia, what is Yugoslavia? Greece, this is all Turkey. The Turks controlled North Africa, down to Mecca and Medina, over all the way to Iraq, parts of Russia, and all the way up into the heart of Europe. The Turks were a megalomaniac empire that controlled a tremendous amount of territory. We shouldn't forget today, for example, if you look at Kazakhstan, if you look at Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, all these countries, and even Western China, Xinjiang province, it's Turkish. And the Turks, in their public schools, talk about these 6 former Soviet republics and Eastern, it's called Western China, Xinjiang province, but it's called East Turkmenistan. All these areas speak a form of Turkish, and the Turkish government has given the people there the right to a Turkish passport. If you go to Turkey today, you go into their schools, you go into their public institutions, all these countries are red on the map. All the 6 republics that broke away from the former Soviet Union, they're parts of Turkey today. Turkey is saying now to the Europeans, it's coming back to the Balkans. Turkey is saying that they are going to retake Greece, Bulgaria, Romania. All these countries will be retaken by Turkey. Any land that was once under Islamic control must always be under Islamic control. This is what the fanatic Turks are saying. Okay. So now, having given you a brief history of Turkey, we should look a little bit now at the modern Turkey. Oh, one more thing, I forgot to mention it, very important. Right here, between Italy and Greece, there's an island called Lepanto. In 1571, there was a sea battle between the Spanish Navy and the Turkish Navy, and the Spanish Navy met the Turkish Navy halfway and destroyed the Turkish Navy. This was the beginning of the end of Turkish power in the Mediterranean Sea. If you remember Man of La Mancha, Don Quixote de la Mancha, he lost his right hand. Miguel de Cervantes lost his right hand in battle fighting the Turks on that ship, in that sea battle against the Turks. So we're not talking about a third world country known as Turkey. We're talking about a very powerful Ottoman Empire with a tradition of ruling very large territories. Now, at the end of the 19th century, Turkey was known as the sick man of Europe. And the man who tried to pull Turkey out of that status was Kemal Mustafa Ataturk. Kemal Ataturk was a secular Muslim. He was not a religious Muslim. Some people even say that he was a Sabbatean secretly. Sabbatean meaning he went back to Shabtai ben Tzvi, the false messiah of the Jews. These people converted to Islam. The son of the famous Eliezer ben Yehuda wrote a book in which he spoke about Kemal Mustafa Ataturk being a Sabbatean, because he said, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. It's interesting that Ataturk would say such a thing, but the point is that Ataturk was a Turk. Ataturk was part of the military people that slaughtered the Armenians. So, in my opinion, he was a Muslim. But he did some remarkable things. He changed the alphabet of the Turkish language from Arabic letters to Latin letters. He insisted that Turkish people dress like Europeans. He insisted that women not wear the veil. And like the Shah of Iran, he chained many of the mosques shut, because the Shah of Iran and Ataturk both agreed that Islam was a form of mental retardation, which was not allowing Turkey and Iran to develop into modern Western countries. And so Islam was suppressed in Turkey. The military was secular. The judiciary was secular. The schools were secular. Now, what has happened over the last few decades is that people in the country of Turkey would all immigrate to the big cities. There was no work, and they were hungry, they were unemployed. And so Saudi Arabia would pitch in a lot of money to build mosques and to build soup kitchens in order to feed the families with many children. Now you have to remember, the Turkish people under Ataturk looked to Europe as their inspiration, primarily to Germany, same with Iran. The role model was the European family, where they had one child and one dog. So you had mother, father, one child, one dog. This is the way Europeans were, so that's the way the Turks should be. But the country people, the fanatic Muslims, the agrarian, the peasants, they had 10 kids. So if there was only work for 2 or 3 kids, the other 7 had to migrate to the cities. There was no work in the cities, so the mosques built by the Saudis would provide soup kitchens. Give this 10, 20, 30 years, and inevitably the demographics go in favor of the fanatic Muslims. And so, as in Gaza, as in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood and the leadership today of Turkey is Muslim Brotherhood, basically defeated the secular Turks in Turkey. And in 2002, there was a show trial in which generals and judges who were secular were thrown in jail for many years in order to Islamicize Turkey. So now Turkey is ruled by a Muslim Brotherhood type leadership, and there are within the Muslim Brotherhood 2 types of leaders. There is the Erdogan group, and there's the Gulen group. Now, for those of you who are Americans and watching this YouTube, you've heard of Gulen, because Gulen has established these charter schools all over the United States, which have been secretly, quietly promoting Islam throughout the United States of America. Gulen came back to Turkey as a result of this scandal in which the 3 ministers had to resign because their sons had been bribed with millions and millions of dollars and euros in order to launder money going to Iran. Some people say Erdogan himself has to retire because his hand is in the till also. And one of the interesting things that was mentioned in the Israeli media yesterday was that Turkey is divided basically into 2 countries. You have Turkey and you have Istanbul. The people who live in Istanbul, we have a joke in Israel, it's like Israel. You have 2 countries in Israel. You have Israel and you have Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is one country and the rest of Israel is another country. The people in Istanbul are used to the wheeling and dealing and the big businesses. But the millions, the tens of millions of country people, poor people, very, very religious Muslims, fanatic Muslims who have come into the cities, don't like this corruption and this stealing and the laundering of money by the supposedly Muslim ministers. And so Gulen today is actually leading a movement. They're trying to deny it, but they say today that the generals, not the generals, the judges and certain military officers are taking their orders from Gulen, and they're waiting to throw Erbakan into jail. I wanted to conclude this by saying that there is talk that Erbakan, to save his skin, is going to make a deal with the military, many of which are in jail, to get them out in order to make a temporary alliance with the military against the Gulen group, which is equally as fanatic as the Erbakan group. Another thing I wanted to say, and maybe this is the most important part of this message, is that the population of Turkey, which is about 80 million people, 31% of Turkey is Alawite, 25% is Kurdish. So we're talking about 56% of Turkey are not Turks. They are other ethnic groups that are being suppressed by Turkish and Islamist interests in Istanbul. And it's one of the reasons why the Turks at first threatened to invade Syria, and then at the last moment the Turks backed down under threats from Iran. Iran was saying, if you fight Bashar al-Assad, we're going to stir up 31% of the population, which is Alawite, and you're going to have a civil war in Turkey. And so, again, those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. Erbakan curses the Jews and curses Israel, and now God's wrath and curse is upon Erbakan. Shalom to everyone.